All right, so get ready because today we're doing a deep dive that's going to take us straight into a true crime case that'll have you second guessing everything you thought you knew about solving murders.
Oh, yeah.
We're going all the way back to 1995 in Schenectady, New York.
Okay.
Picture this. It's a normal spring day that turns tragic.
Right.
A young woman, just 17 years old, named Suzanne Nalman, is found murdered on a local golf course.
Tragic.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and
Mhm.
what makes this case even more interesting is that Suzanne's life was far from ordinary.
That's right. Now, what makes this case really interesting is that Suzanne's life was anything but ordinary. She was struggling, vulnerable, and involved in sex work, which unfortunately influenced the early investigation in a way that had some pretty long-lasting consequences.
Yeah, it feels like we hear that a lot with cases like this, like those societal biases can sometimes cloud those early stages of an investigation.
Absolutely, and that's what makes going back and looking at these cold cases so interesting. We can see how those initial assumptions, which sometimes are driven by prejudice, can totally derail the search for justice.
So let's rewind to the beginning. What do we know about Suzanne's life and, what led to her death?
Well, Suzanne's life was really marked by a lot of hardship.
Yeah.
She was a young woman trying to find her way, and being involved in sex work really exposed her to a level of risk that, sadly, turned out to be fatal.
Right.
And the details of her death are pretty chilling. She was strangled, and there were bite marks on her body, which really points to a level of brutality that shocked the whole community.
It's awful to think about a life cut short like that, especially in such a violent way.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that those bite marks became a crucial piece of evidence, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. The investigators, to their credit, were super meticulous at the crime scene.
Yeah.
They preserved a ton of evidence, including those bite marks and even fingernail scrapings. Little did they know back then that these pieces would become absolutely essential years later.
It's like they were unknowingly creating these time capsules of evidence.
Right?
But, with the boyfriend being an early suspect, did those preserved clues kind of get put on the back burner?
Yes and no. You see, while the boyfriend was the obvious initial suspect, the district attorney, Robert Carney, had his doubts.
Mm.
Even with all the public pressure piling on, he just flat out refused to prosecute
Wow.
because the evidence just wasn't strong enough.
Wow.
It didn't meet his standards.
That's a really bold move for a DA, especially in a high-profile case like this. It really shows his commitment to justice, rather than just trying to get a quick conviction.
You got it. Carney was ready to face the music because he knew that chasing a weak case wouldn't really bring true justice for Suzanne.
Right.
And don't forget, the boyfriend always insisted he was innocent, even when the public was against him.
Yeah, so what happens next? The case goes cold, doesn't it?
Yeah, for years, the case just sat there unsolved. It was a frustrating dead end for Suzanne's loved ones and, for the investigators who were haunted by the lack of closure.
Right.
But fast forward to 2011, and this dedicated cold case team decides to pick it back up.
Okay.
They're determined to finally uncover the truth.
I can't even imagine trying to step into a case like that after so much time has passed.
Yeah.
It must feel like you're trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing or faded or who knows where.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with, like you said, missing pieces, faded with time, just scattered.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you even begin?
Well, that was exactly the challenge they faced. So much time had passed that things had gotten blurry, witnesses were hard to find, and most of the initial leads had dried up.
I bet.
But this team, they had a secret weapon. Advancements in DNA technology, which back in 1995 was basically just a baby.
Okay, now things are getting interesting. It feels like DNA analysis has completely revolutionized the way we solve crimes. Like, every true crime documentary these days comes down to that big aha DNA moment.
Yeah, and in this case, it became the key that unlocked everything. Remember those fingernail scrapings they carefully preserved? Well, because of those advancements in DNA tech, they could finally test them thoroughly, and what they found was a total game changer.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat. What did they discover?
They found a DNA mixture, which is huge.
Why is that?
Well, because it meant there was DNA from more than one person.
Oh, okay.
And even more important, it didn't match the boyfriend's DNA.
Wow.
So that officially cleared him after all those years.
It's almost poetic justice, right? Like, all that time, he was telling the truth, and finally, science could back him up.
Yeah, it just proves that sometimes the most obvious suspect isn't always the guilty one.
So the investigation now had a whole new puzzle to solve. Who did this unknown DNA belong to?
Absolutely, and this is where things take a totally unexpected turn. The team was going through those old files with a fine-tooth comb when one of the detectives stumbled upon something that seemed completely unrelated at first.
What was it?
A newspaper editorial from 1996.
A newspaper editorial. What could that possibly have to do with a murder investigation?
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about cold cases. Sometimes the most random piece of information can be the missing link. This particular editorial wasn't even about Suzanne's case.
Okay.
The journalist was writing about the murder of another woman.
Okay.
Her name was Phyllis Harvey.
Phyllis Harvey.
She was a 37-year-old sex worker, and her body had been found wrapped up and hidden on a porch.
So now we've got two murders, both women involved in sex work. Even if the specifics of their deaths are different, it's hard to ignore those similarities.
Right. And back then, these cases were treated as totally separate incidents.
Yeah.
The police were so focused on Suzanne's boyfriend that they didn't even connect the dots.
Right.
I mean, I guess it's understandable to a degree. Police departments are often swamped, juggling tons of cases, but hindsight, they say, is 20/20.
It's like that saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
Yeah.
Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, but sometimes you gotta zoom out and look at the big picture to see the zebra hiding right there in front of you.
That's a great way to put it. And in this case, the zebra was that connection between Suzanne and Phyllis.
So was there a suspect in Phyllis's case?
Well, this part of the story moved pretty quickly. The landlord of the building where they found Phyllis's body told the police that the porch could only be accessed from one specific apartment.
So whoever lived in that apartment was the main suspect?
Yep.
Did they have a name?
They did. And it's a name that'll send chills down your spine.
Okay, tell me.
Stanislaw Macak.
All right, I'm officially hooked. Tell me everything.
Well, Macak had a criminal record, a really disturbing past that included violence against women, and he already skipped town shortly after Phyllis went missing.
Oh, wow. So was this a classic, he did it once, he'll do it again scenario?
Sadly, it looks that way. Macak's record was a real horror show. Like back in 1989, he got arrested for burglary. Then in 1990, he abducted a woman, she was probably a sex worker, and drove her out to this isolated area where he brutally raped her.
It's terrifying that someone could do something so awful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It just highlights a crucial point. Sexual assault is a crime, no matter what the victim's job is.
Right.
Sex workers are especially vulnerable, but anyone can become a victim.
Absolutely.
Luckily, the woman Macak attacked managed to escape and hide in the woods.
Oh, good.
She eventually got to the police and reported him.
So what happened? Was he brought to justice for that?
Well, kinda. He pleaded guilty, but to a lesser charge, sexual abuse, and got probation.
Come on, that's it. Probation. For what he did.
Yeah, it's a pretty light sentence considering how serious his actions were. He actually ended up getting rearrested the very next day for violating his probation because he ran from Schenectady and didn't report to his probation officer.
So it seems like the justice system wasn't doing its job, protecting women from this dangerous guy.
Unfortunately, it's a reality many victims face, especially back then. The investigation into Macak also showed a history of domestic violence against his wife, who was the mother of his two daughters.
Oh no, this is just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, there were reports of him hitting her while she was pregnant,
Oh my God.
and even one disturbing incident involving rubbing alcohol, again, while she was pregnant.
Really? Oh, that's awful. It seems like Macak had this pattern of escalating violence and, some deeply rooted issues with women that fueled his actions.
Right.
So they finally got this guy locked up. What happens next?
Well, while Macak was in jail for violating probation, the investigation into Phyllis's murder was heating up.
Yeah.
They were building a case against him, determined to make him answer for that horrible crime.
But hold on, what about Suzanne's case? Remember her? That's what kicked off this whole deep dive.
Of course. This is where all the pieces of the puzzle start clicking into place.
Okay.
Remember that single sneaker they found near Suzanne's body?
Yeah, the one without a shoelace? You mentioned it earlier.
Yep, that's the one. It was a size 8-12,
Right,
which is not a very common men's size.
right.
And when they looked up Macak's prison records, they found his shoe size on file was, you guessed it, 8-12.
No way. That can't be a coincidence, can it?
It was a huge red flag, and suddenly Macak became a serious suspect in Suzanne's murder, too.
Right.
They had the similarities between the victims, his history of violence against women, and now this matching shoe size. It was all pointing at him.
Oh man, this is getting good. So, did they bring him in for questioning about Suzanne's murder?
Well, there was a big problem with that plan. Stanislaw Macak had actually died by suicide in prison back in 1996.
What?
Yeah, it happened while he was waiting for his trial for Phyllis's murder and another sexual assault charge.
Oh my God. So he died before he could be held accountable for potentially 2 murders. That must have been a devastating blow to the investigation.
Yeah, it was. You'd think that'd be the end of the road, right?
Yeah.
You can't really put a dead man on trial. But Detective Kane, the lead on Suzanne's cold case, was determined to get proof,
Good for him.
not just suspicion.
Right.
He wanted to give Suzanne's family the closure they deserved, to finally bring her killer to justice, even if it was after he was gone.
It's amazing how dedicated he was to this case, even after all that time.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to prove a dead man committed a crime? That seems almost impossible.
That's where the real brilliance of this investigation comes in. So Macak had 2 daughters,
Right.
and while they had no relationship with him, they shared his DNA.
Oh, that's genius. So even though Macak was gone, they could potentially use his daughter's DNA to link him to Suzanne's murder.
Exactly. It was a long shot, but it was their best hope.
So they went to Macak's ex-wife and daughters, explained the situation, and asked for DNA samples. I bet that was a really tough conversation.
Yeah, you're right. It must have been incredibly difficult for them to get dragged back into that nightmare, having to face the horrible things their father and ex-husband had done.
Absolutely.
But incredibly, they agreed.
They did.
They understood that their DNA could help solve not 1, but 2 unsolved murders.
Wow, that's incredible.
Such a brave and compassionate thing to do. It shows their character and their desire to help bring closure to those tragic cases.
It really is remarkable. So did the daughter's DNA end up being the missing link?
The results were promising, but not completely conclusive.
Okay.
One daughter's DNA was 99 times more likely to be related to the John Doe profile than someone unrelated, and the other daughter's was 177 times more likely.
So it's pointing towards Macak, but it's not a slam dunk.
Right. They needed more.
Yeah.
They needed undeniable evidence that would definitively connect Macak to Suzanne's murder and finally close this long and winding investigation.
So what was the next step? What could they do?
Well, there was one drastic measure left to take.
Mm.
They needed a DNA sample directly from Macak,
Right.
and to get that, they had to exhume his body.
Whoa, exhumation. That's not something you hear about every day in a murder investigation.
Definitely not common, but in this case, it was the only way to get the absolute proof they needed.
Yeah.
It really shows how dedicated those investigators were, how committed they were to finding the truth, no matter how hard it was.
So they went through with the exhumation. What happened next?
They got the exhumation order, and on July 26, 2017, they exhumed Macak's body.
Wow.
They took samples from his femur and even made dental impressions to compare to the bite marks on Suzanne.
Smart.
They weren't leaving anything to chance.
I can't run to find out what happened. Did the DNA from Macak's remains finally solve the mystery?
Well, that's a story for Suzanne's here. Part 2 is our deep dive. We'll pick up right where we left off and explore what happened after the exhumation and how it finally brought closure to Suzanne's case.
So we're back, diving deep into Suzanne Riesman's case, and man, this story just keeps getting more and more intense.
It really does.
Last time, we left off with investigators taking the extraordinary step of exhuming Stanislaw Macak's body,
Right.
hoping that his DNA would be that final piece of the puzzle they needed to connect him to Suzanne's murder.
It was a bold move, a testament to their commitment to getting justice for Suzanne, even if it meant going to some pretty extreme measures.
Yeah, so let's get right to it. What happened when those DNA results finally came in?
Well, I can only imagine the anticipation.
Yeah.
After years of dead ends and false leads, this was the moment of truth.
Absolutely.
And on August 31st, 2017, the results arrived from the State Police Forensic Center,
Okay.
and they confirmed exactly what investigators had suspected all along.
This is it.
The moment we've been waiting for.
What did the results show?
The DNA they got from Macak's femur was a match to that John Doe profile from Suzanne's fingernail scrapings.
Finally, a definitive link. After all these years, they had their man. Or at least, they finally knew who he was.
It was a huge breakthrough.
It was.
And get this, the lab calculated the odds of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Macak to be 1 in 320 billion.
Wow, 1 in 320 billion.
You can't really argue with those kinds of numbers.
No, you can't.
It's safe to say any doubts about Macak's involvement were completely gone after that.
Absolutely.
But they didn't stop there. They wanted to be absolutely sure.
Of course.
To make their case even stronger, investigators also decided to test the sweat from that sneaker they found at the crime scene.
The one without the shoelace, right.
That's the one. And guess what? The sweat matched Macak too.
No way.
Yep. And as if that wasn't enough, They got the results back from the bite mark analysis.
Okay.
And it showed that the dental impressions they took from Maciak's exhumed body were consistent with the bite marks on Suzanne.
It's incredible how, after all these years, they could use forensic science to connect all those dots.
That's pretty remarkable.
It really paints a clear picture of what happened that night.
It does. It's chilling when you think about it, but it's also a testament to the power of science and the dedication of those investigators.
Yeah, so they finally had their answer.
Yeah.
What happened next? Did they close the case? Did they let Suzanne's family know?
Yeah, they officially closed the case, attributing Suzanne's murder to Stanislaw Macak. And, of course, they reached out to Suzanne's mother, hoping to bring some closure after all these years.
It must have been such a bittersweet moment for her.
Yeah.
Knowing the truth, but also knowing that the man responsible was already gone, that he couldn't be held accountable in court.
You'd think there'd be some sense of relief.
Yeah.
Or a feeling of, weight lifted.
Right.
But sadly, it didn't really go down like that.
What happened?
Her reaction to the news was subdued, almost like she was detached from it.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It really shows how justice, even when it's served, doesn't always heal the wounds of the past.
It's a reminder that we can't just focus on the legal aspects of these cases.
Right.
We also need to consider the human side.
Absolutely.
And the importance of support systems for victims' families. The justice system might give them answers, but emotional healing, that's a whole different journey, and it often requires ongoing care and understanding.
This case also makes you think about the ethical questions around exhumations and using familial DNA in investigations.
Definitely. Exhuming a body is a big deal.
It is.
And using DNA from family members who weren't involved in the crime, well, that raises some serious questions about privacy and consent.
Exactly.
I mean, in this situation, Maciak's daughters chose to cooperate. But what if they hadn't? Where do we draw the line between solving crimes and protecting individual rights? These are really complicated issues with no easy answers.
It makes you think about how technology is shaping the future of criminal justice.
Yeah.
And what safeguards we need to put in place to make sure justice is served while also protecting people's freedoms.
It's definitely a conversation we need to keep having as we move forward in this age of, rapidly advancing forensic science.
But let's not forget about the other people affected by this tragedy, the ones who often get overlooked when we're focused on finding the perpetrator.
You're talking about Maciak's family, right? His daughters and his ex-wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you imagine being thrown back into the nightmare of his crimes?
Right.
Being forced to confront the reality of what he did, and then having to contribute to his identification after he's gone. The emotional toll must have been enormous.
It's a reminder that the effects of a crime ripple outward, far beyond the immediate victims and the person who committed it.
Absolutely.
There's a whole network of people who are affected, their lives forever linked to the case.
And let's not forget about Suzanne herself.
Right.
Her story doesn't just end with her tragic death. There's another part of her life that adds a whole new dimension of sadness to this whole case.
What do you mean?
Suzanne had a daughter born just a year before she was murdered.
Oh.
And the baby was immediately put up for adoption, so she never got the chance to know her mother.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. It really adds to the tragedy of the whole story.
It makes you think about what Suzanne's life could have been like if she had had the chance to raise her daughter.
Right.
To experience motherhood, to grow old.
But all of those possibilities were taken from her.
Yeah, and what about Detective Edwardson, the original investigator on the case?
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier that he unfortunately passed away before the case was solved.
It's a really sad detail that adds another layer of sorrow to this already tragic story.
It is.
I mean, he devoted years of his life trying to get justice for Suzanne, and he carried the weight of this case with him even after he retired.
To be so close to the truth, to work so hard on a case and then not be there to see it through to the end.
Yeah.
That must have been so difficult for him and his family.
It's a reminder that these cases take a real toll on the people who dedicate their lives to solving them. They're not just files and evidence. They're about real people, real stories, real people who deserve justice and to be remembered.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm left with this question. What happens now? The case is closed, the person responsible is dead, justice has been served. But is that really the end of the story?
That's the thing about cold cases.
Yeah.
We're always searching for a resolution, for closure.
Right.
But even when all the pieces fall into place, there's often this feeling of incompleteness.
I get that.
The legal fight might be over, But the human story continues.
So here we are at the end of our journey through Suzanne Neiman's case.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Full of twists and turns, highlighting just how powerful persistence can be, how far forensic science has come, and, well, the lasting impact these crimes have.
Absolutely. But as we close this chapter, I keep coming back to this one question. What now? I mean, the case is closed, the perpetrator's dead, justice has been served, at least in some way. But is this really the end of the story?
As the thing about cold cases, we're always looking for that resolution,
Right.
that sense of closure.
Yeah.
But even when we finally get all the answers, there's often this, this lingering feeling that something's missing.
Like it's not really over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The legal part might be finished, that the human side of things, that story goes on.
I think about Suzanne's family, especially her mother.
Yeah,
And knowing who killed her daughter has to bring some comfort.
you'd think so.
But can it ever truly take away the pain of losing her?
That's a question that goes beyond, the science and the evidence. He gets into the whole messy world of grief and trauma.
Right.
For some people, the truth, it can be healing, like a way to finally face those demons from the past.
Yeah.
But for others, it just rips open old wounds.
Yeah.
It's a painful reminder of what they can never get back.
And what about Suzanne's daughter, the one who never got to meet her? Does this knowledge bring her any peace?
It's tough to say. Maybe knowing the truth about her mother's death, it could help her understand things better.
Right.
Maybe give her some closure to a story that's always been shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
But then it also brings up questions about identity, inherited trauma, the ripple effects of a crime that happened before she was even born.
That's a powerful thought. It shows just how far-reaching the consequences of these crimes can be, extending way beyond the immediate victims and the people who committed them.
Yeah, they affect families, generations. They leave a mark that can last for years.
And what about Maciak's family, his daughters, his ex-wife? We can't just forget about them.
Absolutely not. Imagine suddenly being thrust back into the nightmare of his crimes.
Right.
Forced to confront the reality of what he did,
Mm-hmm.
and then having to play a part in identifying him after he's already gone.
It's just,
Unimaginable.
the emotional toll must be incredibly heavy.
It's a reminder that we need to offer support not only to the families of victims, but also to those who were close to the perpetrator, even if they were estranged.
Mm.
Right, because they're carrying a burden they never asked for.
Yeah.
It's a heavy weight to know that someone you're connected to, even if you don't have a relationship with them, was capable of doing something so horrific.
It makes you question everything.
It does.
Your family, who you can trust, the difference between good and evil.
It's a stark reminder that the line between good and evil, it can be pretty blurry.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people who seem the most normal are actually hiding dark secrets.
It's like those monsters we always hear about.
Yeah.
They're not always lurking in the shadows.
Right.
Sometimes they're hiding right in front of us.
Exactly. And then there's Detective Edwardson, the original investigator, who unfortunately didn't live to see the case solved.
Right.
His dedication, his unwavering commitment to finding justice for Suzanne, it really was a driving force in this breakthrough.
It was.
It's a testament to the hard work and commitment of all those law enforcement officers who work these cases, often long after the public has moved on.
It's a powerful reminder that behind the badges and the procedures,
There are real people.
absolutely,
People who are deeply affected by the things they see and experience on the job.
they feel the grief, the frustration, the victories, the setbacks, all while navigating that complex legal system.
It's a reminder that we need to support these individuals,
Yes, we do.
to recognize the toll these investigations take on them.
Definitely.
We ask so much of them, to solve the unsolvable,
Right.
to make sense of the senseless.
Yeah,
And we owe it to them to provide the care and understanding they deserve.
absolutely.
This case, it also brings up some really important questions about the role of technology in the justice system, especially when it comes to DNA evidence and the ethical implications of using it.
Right. And we saw how crucial those advancements in DNA analysis were in finally identifying Macak.
We did.
But we also have to think about the potential downsides, the questions about privacy and consent, especially when we're talking about using familial DNA.
It's a tough situation, a real double-edged sword. Yeah, because on the one hand, you've got DNA technology that's completely changed the game.
It has.
We can solve cold cases,
Right.
clear people who were wrongly convicted,
Yeah.
bring closure to families who've been waiting for answers for years.
It's amazing.
But on the other hand, it also raises concerns about genetic surveillance and the potential for misuse.
I see that.
Where do we draw the line when it comes to using personal information in the name of justice?
It's a complex issue for sure. As technology keeps getting more advanced, we need to strike a balance.
Yeah.
Make sure those tools are being used responsibly and ethically.
We can't just blindly embrace the benefits of DNA technology without considering the risks.
Right, we have to talk about the possible consequences, both the good and the bad.
Exactly.
And it's not just scientists and lawmakers who need to be involved in that conversation. It's everyday people, too.
It's a call to action for all of us
It is.
to really think about the future of forensic science and make sure it upholds justice while also protecting individual rights.
But even as technology evolves, we can't lose sight of the human side of things.
Absolutely.
It's the dedication of the investigators, the compassion of those who support the victims, the courage of those who share their stories.
That's what drives the search for justice.
This deep dive into Suzanne Nalman's case has been a real eye-opener, a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of truth.
It has.
It's also shown us how crime affects individuals, families, and our society as a whole.
We've explored the intricacies of the justice system, how forensic science has developed, and the ethical questions we face as we push the boundaries of what's possible.
And most importantly, I think we've honored the memories of Suzanne and Phyllis by making sure their stories are heard.
Absolutely.
So as we move forward, let's take these lessons with us, the questions we've raised,
All right.
and remember to always strive for justice.
It's not just about reaching a verdict. It's about healing, understanding, and working to prevent tragedies like this from happening again.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.